My name is Iva Kennedy, and at 63 years old, I never thought I'd be throwing down ultimatums at my own dinner table. But there I was, watching my daughter-in-law, Amanda's face twist with spite as she spat those words at me. "You're not even half the woman my mother is." The dining room fell silent. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against hardwood like a warning. 20 years of helping them, and this was my thanks. Before I share what happened next, why don't you tell me where you're watching from? And hit that subscribe button while I gather my thoughts. I've always considered myself a reasonable woman. After James, my husband passed away from a heart attack 8 years ago. I promised myself I would maintain strong relationships with what little family I had left, especially my only son, Daniel. When Daniel first brought Amanda home 7 years ago, I welcomed her with open arms. She was beautiful, charming, and seemed to make my son happier than I'd seen him since his father died. I remember thinking how lucky we all were to have found each other. After they got engaged, I wanted to give them the best start possible. With the money from James's life insurance, I paid for most of their wedding, a beautiful ceremony that cost nearly $30,000. Amanda's parents, Vivian and Robert, contributed a small amount despite their considerable wealth. At the time, I didn't mind. I was just happy to see my son married to someone he loved. The generosity didn't stop there. When they struggled to secure their first home, I offered the down payment $50,000 that I'd been saving for my retirement. Then when they needed to renovate, I let them live with me for a full year. My 3-bedroom house suddenly felt very small with the 3 of us, but I kept reminding myself it was temporary. Now, 3 years later, they've hit another rough patch. The housing market in our area has skyrocketed, and they had to sell their home when Daniel switched jobs. For the past 3 months, I've been paying their rent while they look for a new place, a fact that Amanda conveniently forgets whenever the topic of money arises. What bothers me isn't the financial support itself. What cuts deep is how Amanda has changed over the years. The sweet, grateful young woman who once brought me flowers has slowly transformed into someone who seems to find fault in everything I do. And her favorite comparison, her mother, Vivian. Vivian comes from old money. She's never worked a day in her life, unlike me, who spent 40 years as a nurse. Her house is professionally decorated. Her clothes are designer brands, and her idea of cooking is calling her personal chef. Despite their wealth, Vivian and Robert rarely help Daniel and Amanda financially, a fact that increasingly frustrates me as I stretch my retirement funds thinner and thinner. Tonight's Sunday dinner was supposed to be special. Daniel recently received a promotion at work, and I wanted to celebrate. I spent all day preparing his favorite foods, pot roast with all the trimmings, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. James's old recipe that Daniel always loved. The table was set candles lit when Daniel called to say they'd be late. "Amanda's on the phone with her mom," he explained apologetically. "We'll be there soon." When they finally arrived 45 minutes late, Amanda was still on her phone finishing her conversation with Vivian as she walked through my front door without so much as a hello. The warning signs were there from the beginning of dinner. Nothing was right for Amanda. The pot roast was a bit dry, not like her mother's, which apparently fell off the bone. My cloth napkins were quaint, not like her mother's fine linen ones. Even my congratulations to Daniel for his promotion somehow fell short when Amanda mentioned how her father would have celebrated with an expensive bottle of champagne, not my modest, sparkling cider. Each comment was like a paper cut, small on its own, but increasingly painful as they accumulated throughout the evening. Daniel noticed my discomfort, but, as usual, he said nothing, caught between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. The tension had been building for months, but I'd been swallowing my words like bitter pills, telling myself that keeping the peace was worth the discomfort. But some pills are too large to swallow, and some truths need to be spoken. 2 months ago, Amanda had criticized my gardening, comparing my modest flower beds to her mother's professionally landscaped grounds. Last month, she turned up her nose at the birthday gift I'd carefully selected for her, a handmade scarf I'd spotted at a local artisan market, saying it wasn't her aesthetic like the designer accessories her mother always chose. Each time Daniel would shoot me an apologetic glance, but never actually stand up for me. I began to recognize the pattern. Amanda would criticize, I would retreat, and Daniel would pretend not to notice. It was a dance we'd all become too familiar with, and I was growing tired of my steps. What Amanda didn't know, or chose to ignore, was the reality of their financial situation. Daniel had confided in me that they were struggling despite appearances. His new promotion came with more responsibility, but not the substantial raise they'd been hoping for. Amanda continued to spend, as if they had her parents' wealth accumulating credit card debt that kept Daniel up at night. I knew they had been turned down for a mortgage twice already because of their debt-to-income ratio. The rent I was paying for their luxury apartment was more than my monthly pension, but whenever I gently suggested they look for something more affordable, Amanda would act as if I was trying to force them into poverty. "We have a certain standard of living," she'd said dismissively when I brought up a nice garden apartment in a slightly less prestigious neighborhood. What hurt most was how Amanda would call her mother daily, seeking advice on everything from recipes to decor, while my suggestions were routinely dismissed. Vivian, who had never cooked a meal or furnished a home without professional help, was apparently the authority on homemaking, while my decades of practical experience counted for nothing. "Mom knows these things," Amanda would say. "She has taste." The implication that I didn't have taste, that my modest, comfortable home was somehow inferior, stung more than I cared to admit. I'd created a warm, inviting space on a nurse's salary, balancing bills and a mortgage alone after James died. I'd put Daniel through college without debt, worked overtime for years to provide opportunities, and now found myself financing his adult lifestyle while being treated as if I had nothing of value to offer beyond my checkbook. The resentment had been building like pressure in a sealed pot. I could feel it pushing against the lid of my patience, threatening to explode. Yet, still, I said nothing, did nothing, hoping that somehow things would improve, that Amanda would mature, that Daniel would find his voice. But hope is not a strategy, and silence rarely solves problems. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and others is to speak your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. I just didn't know that tonight would be the night my truth would finally boil over. The dinner had progressed from uncomfortable to unbearable by the time we reached dessert. I placed my homemade apple pie on the table, the crust golden brown and slightly bubbling with cinnamon-scented filling, a recipe that had been passed down from my grandmother. "It looks rustic," Amanda said, her tone making it clear that rustic wasn't a compliment. "My mother's baker makes the most amazing French apple tart. The layers of apple are so thin you can practically see through them." I nodded and began serving slices, determined not to let her comments ruin a dessert that had won blue ribbons at our county fair 3 years running. Daniel, perhaps sensing my frustration, quickly took a bite and made an appreciative sound. "This is delicious, Mom. Just like Dad used to love it." For a brief moment, I felt a rush of gratitude toward my son, but Amanda wasn't finished. "Speaking of your mom's baking," she said to Daniel, ignoring me completely, "did I tell you my mother is hosting a charity gala next month? She's hired that pastry chef who won the international competition in Paris." "That sounds fancy," I said, trying to be polite, despite the obvious comparison. "Oh, it is. The tickets are $5,000 per couple. Mother wanted to get us tickets as an early anniversary gift, but they sold out to her friends first." I couldn't help myself. $5,000 for one evening. Amanda straightened her shoulders defensively. "It's for charity, Eva. Besides, that's normal in my family's social circle." "I'm sure the charity appreciates it," I said, struggling to keep my tone neutral. "Speaking of money, I wanted to talk to you both about your housing situation." Daniel instantly tensed. Amanda's eyes narrowed. "What about it?" she asked. I took a deep breath. "I'm happy to have been able to help with your rent these past 3 months, but I need to be honest, I can't keep doing it indefinitely. My financial advisor is concerned about my retirement funds." "We're still looking for the right place," Daniel said quickly. "The market is tough right now." "I understand that," I replied gently. "But maybe it's time to consider some different neighborhoods, or perhaps a slightly smaller place until you've saved more." Amanda's fork clattered against her plate. "You want us to downgrade our lifestyle, move to some cramped apartment in a questionable area." "That's not what I said," I clarified. "There are plenty of lovely, safe neighborhoods that are more affordable." "Daniel just got a promotion," Amanda snapped. "We're moving up in the world, not down." "Yes, and I'm very proud of him," I said. "But from what Daniel's shared with me, the promotion doesn't fully support the rent on your current place." Daniel shot me a betrayed look. I immediately regretted mentioning our private conversation. "You two have been discussing our finances behind my back?" Amanda asked, her voice rising. "No, not like that," Daniel tried to explain. "I just mentioned to Mom that things were tight despite the promotion." "Well, if things are so tight," Amanda said sarcastically, "maybe we should ask my parents for help instead." although they're currently in the Maldives for their anniversary trip. The extravagant vacation of Amanda's parents, while their daughter needed financial help, didn't escape my notice. Neither did the fact that they hadn't offered assistance, despite knowing their daughter and son-in-law were between homes. That would be fine, I said carefully. I just need to be realistic about my own finances. I'm not getting any younger, and my pension only stretches so far. Amanda's face flushed red. So you're cutting us off after all my mother does for us. And now, you're pulling back the one thing you contribute. The unfairness of this statement hit me like a physical blow. One thing I contribute, as if the down payment on their house, their wedding, and countless other gifts meant nothing. Amanda, Daniel warned, finally seeming to recognize the conversation was heading into dangerous territory. But she was on a roll now, years of thinly veiled contempt bubbling to the surface. Your mother would never understand what it means to maintain appearances, Daniel. She's content with this. She gestured dismissively around my dining room at the furniture I'd carefully selected and maintained the walls James and I had painted together, the home where I'd raised my son. Amanda, that's enough, Daniel said more firmly this time. But Amanda wasn't finished. She turned to me, eyes blazing with a mixture of entitlement and disdain that took my breath away. You're not even half the woman my mother is, she spat. You never will be. The room fell silent. Daniel froze his fork, suspended halfway to his mouth, eyes wide with shock. I felt something shift inside me, a lifetime of accommodation and peacemaking, suddenly giving way to clarity and resolve. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back from the table. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. I looked directly into Amanda's eyes and spoke the words that had been building for years. Then she can start paying your rent. The silence that followed my statement felt eternal, though it probably lasted only seconds. Amanda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, her prepared script suddenly useless in the face of my unexpected response. Daniel was the first to break the silence. Mom, he said, his voice strained between shock and a strange note of respect. You don't have to. No, I do have to say this, I interrupted, surprising even myself with my firmness. I've been quiet for too long. I turned back to Amanda, whose indignant expression had been replaced by one of uncertainty. She wasn't used to me standing my ground. Amanda, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Let me be clear about what I have contributed. I paid $50,000 for the down payment on your first house. I covered 70% of your wedding costs, $30,000. I let you live in my home rent-free for a year while you renovated, and I've been paying your rent $2,000 a month for the past 3 months. I ticked each item off on my fingers, watching as Daniel's eyes widened. I realized then that he might not have known the full extent of my financial support. Mom, I had no idea it was that much, he said quietly. Of course you didn't, I replied. I never wanted to keep a ledger of my love for you. But that doesn't mean I should be treated like an ATM while being told I don't measure up. Amanda's shock was morphing into defensive anger. Her eyes welled with tears, a response I'd seen before when she was confronted with uncomfortable truths. "You're twisting everything," she said, her voice quavering. "You offered those things. We never asked. And now you're throwing it in our faces because you want to control us." "Offering help is not the same as signing up for disrespect," I replied. "And setting boundaries is not controlling you. It's taking care of myself." Daniel looked torn, glancing between his wife and me, as if seeing both of us clearly for the first time. "Why haven't Vivian and Robert helped more?" I asked, addressing the question that had been bothering me for years. "They have significantly more resources than I do." "My parents believe in self-sufficiency," Amanda said stiffly. I couldn't help the short laugh that escaped me. Self-sufficiency. While living in an apartment paid for by your mother-in-law? "That's temporary," she snapped. "So is my retirement fund if I keep spending it on your housing," I countered. Amanda stood abruptly, tears now streaming down her face. "I will not be spoken to like this. Daniel, we're leaving." Daniel remained seated, conflict evident in every line of his body. "Daniel," Amanda repeated, her tone demanding. "Can we just talk this through?" he asked, looking between us. "Mom's right about some things, Amanda. We have been taking advantage, so you're choosing her over me." Amanda's voice rose an octave. "After everything my family has done for you." "What exactly has your family done for us, financially speaking?" Daniel asked quietly. It was the first time I'd ever heard him question the narrative Amanda had constructed about her family's generosity. Amanda's face contorted with fury. "I can't believe you're siding with her. I'm going to the car. Join me when you remember who your wife is." She stormed out the front door, slamming behind her, with enough force to rattle the photos on my wall. The sound echoed through the house like an exclamation point on our confrontation. Daniel and I sat in silence for a moment. Then he sighed deeply and reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Mom. I had no idea things had gotten this bad. I should have stepped in sooner." "Yes, you should have," I agreed gently. "But I should have spoken up too." "I'll pay you back," he promised. "Every cent." "This isn't about the money, Daniel. It's about respect." He nodded, then glanced toward the door. "I should go talk to her, try to make her understand." I squeezed his hand. "You do what you need to do. But Daniel, please remember that you deserve respect too, from both of us." He stood and hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom. That never changes." After he left following his angry wife into the night, I sat alone at my dining table, surrounded by half-eaten dessert and the aftermath of a confrontation years in the making. I felt shaken, but also strangely liberated. For the first time in years, I had stood up for myself, spoken my truth. I didn't know what would happen next, whether this confrontation would heal our relationship or damage it beyond repair. All I knew was that something had irrevocably changed, and despite my fear of losing my son, I couldn't regret finding my voice. The house felt unnaturally quiet after Daniel left. I mechanically cleared the table, wrapping leftover food and washing dishes, the familiar routine grounding me as my mind replayed the evening's events on a continuous loop. Had I gone too far? Not far enough? The questions circled like restless birds. For a full week, I heard nothing from Daniel or Amanda. No calls, no texts. The silence hurt more than Amanda's words ever could. I found myself jumping whenever the phone rang, only to feel disappointed when it wasn't my son's name on the caller ID. By the third day, doubt began to creep in. Maybe I should call and apologize, smooth things over for Daniel's sake. The old pattern, my yielding to keep the peace, beckoned like a familiar path. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me, a realignment of my own worth that wouldn't let me backtrack. Instead, I called my old friend Patricia, who I'd been neglecting in my efforts to be available for Daniel and Amanda. "It's about time," she said when I confessed what had happened. "I've been watching that girl walk all over you for years. You're not an ATM either. You're a person deserving of respect." Her validation was like rain in a drought. I hadn't realized how isolated I'd become, how much I'd internalized Amanda's assessments of my worth. Patricia invited me to join her book club, and I accepted my first social commitment in months that didn't revolve around Daniel's schedule. As days turned into a second week of silence, my emotions evolved. Doubt gave way to anger at Amanda's entitlement, at Daniel's failure to stand up for me sooner, but mostly at myself for enabling the dynamics for so long. The anger eventually mellowed into a kind of grief, mourning the relationship I had wanted with my daughter-in-law, the family dinners I had envisioned in my later years. Finally, the grief transformed into resolve. I made an appointment with my financial advisor, Martha, determined to understand exactly where I stood. "I've been concerned about the withdrawals from your accounts," Martha admitted when I explained the situation. "At this rate, you'll deplete your retirement savings 10 years earlier than projected." The numbers were sobering. Between the down payment wedding and recent rent payments, I had given Daniel and Amanda nearly $80,000 over the past 7 years, a significant portion of what James had left me. "You're not in crisis yet," Martha assured me, "but you need to stop the financial bleeding now, if you want security in your later years." That evening, I wrote a letter to Daniel that I didn't immediately send. Writing helped clarify my thoughts, distilling weeks of emotion into clear statements of boundaries and love. I explained that while my emotional support would always be unconditional, my financial support needed to end. I detailed the reality of my financial situation and my fears about my own future. I expressed my love for him and my hope for reconciliation, but on new, healthier terms. The letter became a kind of touchstone, a physical reminder of my worth and my right to protect it. I didn't send it right away, sensing that the timing wasn't yet right, but its existence on my desk was comforting evidence of my growing resolve. The most difficult realization was acknowledging how my enabling had contributed to the problem. In my desire to be helpful and needed, I had allowed boundaries to be crossed repeatedly until they no longer existed. My generosity offered without expectation of gratitude, but certainly deserving of basic respect, had somehow morphed into an entitlement in Amanda's mind. That wasn't entirely her fault. I had never clearly communicated my limits or my feelings when her comments hurt me. I had smiled through clenched teeth, written checks with a trembling hand, all while telling myself I was doing it for Daniel's happiness. But had I really been, or had I been doing it to avoid conflict, to maintain an illusion of family harmony that existed only in my mind? The questions were uncomfortable but necessary, part of the painful process of reclaiming my self-worth from the rubble of broken expectations. On a rainy Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks after our confrontation, a knock at my door startled me from reading. I opened it to find Daniel standing on my porch alone, his shoulders hunched against the drizzle, his expression a mixture of contrition and determination. "Can I come in, Mom?" he asked, his voice hoarse, as if he'd been arguing or crying. I stepped back to let him enter, my heart pounding with hope and apprehension. We settled in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words. "I owe you an apology," he began, looking directly at me. "Several, actually. I've let you down in so many ways." "You're here now," I said softly. "That's a start." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my throat tightened. "I had no idea how much money you've given us over the years. I mean, I knew about the wedding and the down payment, but I thought those were gifts you could easily afford. I didn't realize you were dipping into your retirement savings." "You never asked," I pointed out gently. "And I never volunteered the information. That's no excuse. I should have been more aware, more responsible." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The thing is, Mom, I've been hiding things from you too. Our financial situation is worse than you know. Amanda, she has a spending problem." I stayed silent, giving him space to continue. "Credit card debt, store accounts I didn't know about. We're nearly $60,000 in debt, not counting student loans." He looked down at his hands. "That's why we couldn't get approved for a mortgage. It's not just the market, it's our credit score." The revelation didn't surprise me as much as it should have. I had noticed Amanda's constant stream of packages, her new clothes and accessories that seemed excessive for their income. "Have you talked to Amanda about this?" I asked. Daniel nodded, his expression pained. "That's all we've been doing for the past 2 weeks. Arguing, crying, talking in circles. She doesn't see it as a problem. She says we just need more income, that cutting back is settling for less than we deserve." "And what do you think?" He was quiet for a moment. "I think I've been living someone else's life. Amanda's vision of success, the right neighborhood, the right clothes, the right social connections. It's exhausting and hollow." He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "Does that make me a failure?" "No," I said firmly. "It makes you honest. There's no shame in living within your means. Try telling Amanda that." His laugh was humorless. "She grew up with everything handed to her. The idea of budgeting is foreign to her. And her parents, let me guess, they encourage her expectations while providing minimal actual support." Daniel nodded. "They talk about self-sufficiency, but they're the ones who created her expectations in the first place. They dangled opportunities in front of us, connections for my career, introductions to their friends. But the only actual financial help was a small contribution to the wedding. Meanwhile, they vacation in the Maldives and renovate their vacation home." I chose my next words carefully. "Daniel, I can't continue supporting you financially. Not because I don't want to help, but because I literally can't afford to." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not here to ask for money. I'm here because I need advice and because I miss my mom." Those simple words melted something inside me. "I've missed you too." "I've suggested financial counseling to Amanda," he continued, "and marriage therapy. We need both." "How did she respond?" His expression told me everything. "She says she doesn't need someone telling her how to spend our money. But I've insisted. It's non-negotiable if we want to stay together." I felt a surge of pride at my son's newfound backbone. "That's a healthy boundary, Daniel." "I learned from the best," he said with a small smile. "Watching you stand up for yourself that night, it was like something clicked for me. I've been letting people walk all over me, Amanda, her parents, even my boss. Always seeking approval, never rocking the boat." "You get that from me," I admitted. "Or at least the old me." "I don't know what's going to happen with Amanda and me," he confessed. "I love her, but I don't know if we want the same things anymore. Or maybe we never did, and I was too blind to see it." I reached across and squeezed his hand. "Whatever happens, I'm here for you. Not financially," I added with a wry smile, "but in all the ways that matter more." He squeezed back. "That's all I need, Mom. That's all I've ever needed." As Daniel left that evening, promising to keep me updated on their financial counseling, I felt a cautious optimism unfurling. The road ahead wouldn't be easy for any of us, but at least we were finally walking it with our eyes open. 3 months passed, bringing changes I could never have predicted on that fateful dinner night. The journey wasn't smooth or linear, more like a winding path with unexpected turns and occasional backsliding. Daniel and Amanda did begin financial counseling, though Amanda initially attended under protest. To my surprise, the counselor's objective assessment of their situation seemed to finally penetrate Amanda's denial. When confronted with actual numbers and projections, she couldn't maintain the fiction that everything was fine. "The financial counselor told us we're one emergency away from bankruptcy," Daniel confided during one of our now regular coffee meetings. It finally scared Amanda enough to agree to a strict budget. The budget meant significant lifestyle changes. They moved out of the luxury apartment I had been subsidizing and into a modest 2-bedroom in a less prestigious but perfectly nice neighborhood. Amanda had to cut up several credit cards and commit to a repayment plan that would take years to complete. Our relationship remained fragile. Amanda and I were cautiously polite when we saw each other, the memory of our confrontation still raw. I had apologized for the public nature of my boundary setting, though not for the boundaries themselves. She had reluctantly acknowledged that her comments about me had been hurtful, though I sensed the apology came at Daniel's insistence, rather than from genuine remorse. Still, it was progress, small steps toward a new understanding. Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming my life outside of my identity as Daniel's mother. I joined Patricia's book club, started volunteering at the local animal shelter, and even took a watercolor class I'd been eyeing for years, but never made time for. Each activity was a thread in a new tapestry of self that wasn't defined by maternal sacrifice. I also committed to my own financial health, working with Martha to rebuild my retirement savings. It would take time to recover from the substantial gifts I'd given Daniel and Amanda, but the bleeding had stopped. For the first time in years, my account balances were rising rather than falling. 2 months after our confrontation, we attempted a family dinner again. This time, I suggested meeting at a moderately priced restaurant neutral territory where everyone would be on their best behavior. The evening was strained but civil, with none of the barbed comparisons that had characterized our previous gatherings. I noticed subtle but significant changes in Amanda. Her designer handbag was gone, replaced by a quality but less ostentatious one. She spoke less about her parents and their lifestyle, perhaps finally recognizing how those comparisons had affected our relationship. Most importantly, Daniel was different. He spoke up when conversations became uncomfortable, gently steering us away from potential conflict zones. He openly discussed their financial progress, taking ownership of past mistakes rather than making excuses. "We've paid off 2 credit cards completely," he shared with pride, "and I've started contributing to my 401k again." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased. "Financial security isn't glamorous, but it lets you sleep at night." Amanda nodded, surprising me. The counselor said something similar. I never thought much about retirement or emergency funds growing up. My parents always just had money. It was the first time she'd acknowledged her privileged upbringing without using it as a standard others should aspire to. Progress indeed. As we finished dessert, Amanda hesitantly addressed me directly. Another rarity. "Ivor, I've been thinking about what happened at dinner that night. I said things I shouldn't have said." "Yes, you did," I agreed, not making it easier for her, but not twisting the knife either. "I compared you to my mother in a way that was unfair. The truth is, you've done more for us than my parents have in practical ways. I didn't see it then, but the financial counseling has made some things very clear." It wasn't a full apology, but it was more self-awareness than Amanda had ever demonstrated before. I decided to meet her halfway. "Thank you for saying that. I know these changes haven't been easy for you." "They haven't," she admitted. "But Daniel's happier, less stressed. So maybe it's worth it." As we parted that evening, Daniel hugged me tightly and whispered, "Baby steps, Mom, but she's trying." The journey to healing our family bonds continued over the following weeks. There were setbacks. Amanda occasionally slipped into old patterns of comparison, and I sometimes found myself bristling at imagined slights. But the foundation had shifted. Boundaries had been established, realities acknowledged. We were building something new from the ruins of old expectations. The most profound change was within me. I no longer measured my worth as a mother by how much I could give or how much I could endure. I had reclaimed my right to respect, to financial security, to a life beyond maternal sacrifice. In finding my voice that night at the dinner table, I had discovered a fundamental truth. The moment I stood up for myself was the moment I truly became the woman my son needed me to be. Not an enabler or a doormat, but a model of healthy self-respect and appropriate boundaries. I can't say our story has reached its happy ending yet. Real life isn't that neat. Amanda still struggles with financial restraint. Daniel still sometimes falters in maintaining boundaries with both his wife and me. I still occasionally question whether I've done enough, given enough. But we're all growing, learning to relate to each other as adults with distinct needs and boundaries, rather than roles in a family drama. And that, I believe, is the true measure of family success. Not how perfect we appear from the outside, but how honestly we can face our imperfections together. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family members who took your generosity for granted? What boundaries have you set to protect your own well-being? Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is to say no with love. Thank you for watching, and may you find the courage to speak your truth when it matters most.